Hey there, happy little students. I'm sorry that we did not get to have class yesterday because of the ice coming in, but I needed to go over some more information with you so you'll be adequately prepared for the coming exams on Monday the 28th. So we're going to roll through some slides and some notes on Thursday instead of doing what we would normally do on Thursday, just to make sure that you have this in advance. Hopefully we'll be back in class on Friday and we can continue on then. So let's get to it. We've been studying human geography and we've been looking at boundaries. And as we get to the end of the chapter on boundaries, we're going to look at drawing electoral district boundaries. So this deals with politics, that deals with voting, it deals with elections and all of that. And it's actually a way that you can, if you do this dishonestly, you can control the outcome of an election even if no one changes the way that they vote. So the idea behind a democracy is that there is one person and one vote. So everyone has equal voice as long as they are eligible to vote according to that country or that state or that district's rules. There's different limitations on who can vote, and those are different from country to country. Right now, the limitations on our voting is you can't be a felon, and you must be 18 to vote in a presidential election. At different times in the history of our nation, we've had different other restrictions about who can vote, and so that's changed over time by voting, by our representation. But the idea is every person's voice has the same volume. Meaning, if I am a really, really rich guy and I own all sorts of land, or if I'm a really, really poor person and I don't own anything, as long as we're both eligible to vote, our votes count exactly the same. So one person, one vote is the way democracy works. But if you can control where district lines fall, you can change the overall outcome of elections and who has control of representation of your state or your area. And that's done by something called gerrymandering, which we're going to look at momentarily. So we do have representation at our federal level. That's the national government. We are represented by our president, and the president is elected by the Electoral College of 538 electors. The reason why we get 538 is there's 435 representatives, House of Representatives, in our federal Congress. There's 100 senators, 2 for every state, and then there's 3 electors that come from the District of Columbia, which does not have senators or House of Representatives, but does get a say in the presidential election. We also have representation in the Senate. Each state, no matter the size or population of the state, has 2 senators. So all states have equal voice in the Senate. And then the third of our bicameral House of Representatives and Senate in Congress is the representatives, the House of Representatives, and that is 435 total representatives. Those 435 representatives are divided up among the 50 states based on population. So if you have more people in your state, you're going to have a lot more representatives. If you have less people in your state, you're going to have less representatives. So in our government, everyone gets to vote on the president, or they get to vote on their electors. Their state gets to vote on the president. Every state has 2 senators, and then every state has some representatives based on population. So just because you're a big state doesn't mean that you get to have all the say, and just because you're a small state doesn't mean you don't have much say at all. It's all balanced within these 2 branches, and then we also have, of course, the Supreme Court. So how do we find out about the numbers? How is it divided up? Well, every 10 years, the government does a census. And when they do that census, they acquire information such as what is the population and where do people live. And they do that for the entire country. We just did it 2 years ago in 2020. As populations change, as people move from state to state, and some states increase in population and some states decrease in population, that's going to require redistricting for each state. So if one state gains a lot of people, like Texas has over the last 10 years, and another state loses a lot of people, then the state that loses people is going to lose a representative or more, and the state that gains people is going to gain a representative or more in the House of Representatives, which are elected every 2 years. It also will change the way the Electoral College works for the election of president, because the 270 electoral votes are based on population as well. So let's take a look at the number of electoral votes that took place for the last presidential election of 2020. So in 2020, we can look at the big ones and the small ones. In 2020, Texas had 38 electors that could vote then, representing the entire state on president. California had 55. Montana and Wyoming only had 3. So Montana has 2 senators and one representative from the House of Representatives. That equates to the 3 electors from the Electoral College. But because we did the census in 2020, that means the next presidential election, there's going to be some changes because populations from each state changed. By the way, these again add up to 538. That means that it takes 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. So if you've ever watched a presidential election, you've probably seen the march to 270 or something like that. So here's what 2024 looks like, or will look like in the next presidential election, because people have moved. There's been several people that have moved to Texas from various states. So we're actually gaining 3 electoral votes in the state of Texas. Montana, there's been people that have moved there, so they're gaining 1. Colorado's gaining 1. All the brown states here are not gaining. They're having no change, no gain and no loss. Florida is gaining 2 electoral votes for the Electoral College of the 538. Several states have lost some. New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, California, they've all lost 1 electoral vote that has been coming into the states that are now blue. So since that changes the number of electoral votes we have for a presidential election, that could change the outcome of presidential elections, because some states that vote a certain way toward a certain political party can remain voting in that same way. But it also may change that. It may not change because the people who moved and relocated, they may have had the persuasion of their political convictions, and that may tip the scales in the state that gained electors to push it to the other political party. Another thing that changes when population changes in a state is those congressional districts, the number of House of Representatives that you have into the federal government. So on the left side, you can see a state map. This is the way the congressional districts are right now broken down in Texas. And this also shows the way that those different districts voted and by what margin. So you can see the lines here that breaks it down into 36 different districts. And the reason why it's really big districts and small districts is because each of these districts, each of these portions of this map should be of about the same population. So it's 36 equally populated districts. Now, with the changes in the population, we have gained 2 representatives, 2 congressional seats to the House of Representatives of the federal government. That means we have to redraw all the lines, and we have to redraw them in such a way that they each have equal population. So that data, that information from the census is extremely important. It changes the way our government, who's in control and who's not, and what states have more say or less say. So again, every 10 years this happens. We have a census. The last one is in 2020, and that will require redistricting. That will require redistricting of the House of Representatives, of the congressional districts, and that will also redistrict the precinct districts of who's voting across the state. So how do they draw district lines? How do they decide? Well, the first thing they have to do to establish fair district lines is they've got to get that count, that census that comes every 10 years. And whenever you know a number of people living in a state, and you know the number of congressional districts that you're allotted, in our case, in 2022, for that election, it will be 38 congressional districts. Once you have the count and you know how many districts you are supposed to have, then you can divide up and know about what population needs to be in each district. So then you have to map. So you've got to map out based on the population distribution. Out in West Texas, the population density is much more sparse than it is in the Dallas Metroplex. And so you're going to have more districts in the Dallas Metroplex than you are going to have out in West Texas or in Southwest Texas, where the population is more sparse. So you calculate that up. After you counted and you mapped, you divide the population by the number of representatives, and then you draw those lines and try to make them as equal as possible. This is a fair way to draw district lines. But where change comes, opportunity comes for dishonesty. And so there's something called gerrymandering. What gerrymandering is it's drawing those new district lines when redistricting takes place, drawing those lines in order to benefit one particular group or political party unfairly. It is a wrong practice. It is supposed to be illegal. It's definitely immoral because it's trying to give more of a voice to either the majority or the minority party. And either one can come out. And here's where it came from. You don't have to write this next part down. Gerrymandering came from this practice. There was a new district drawn in 1812, and Governor Gerry was he thought that looked like a salamander. I'm sorry, Governor Gerry is the one who redistricted and was in control of that and had heavy influence in it. There's a journalist who saw that, and he combined Gerry from Governor Gerry and salamander because he thought the new district looked like a salamander. And so he coined this term, gerrymandering, which is kind of a weird term. And it doesn't even look like a salamander. It looks kind of like a dragon. So here's the initial district that was drawn by Governor Gerry. And this is where gerrymandering came from, was this political cartoon by a journalist. And then the name just stuck. So gerrymandering has been a practice and had that name for quite some time. There's two types of gerrymandering. One is going to give an unfair advantage to the majority, so they're going to have more voice than they should. The other is going to give an unfair advantage to the minority, and it's going to give them more voice than they should have. So an unfair advantage to either the majority or the minority party. The first type is called cracking or diluting, and you can use either word. If you crack or dilute a voting block, the way this works is you scatter out voters across multiple districts, so you dilute out their voice, and this is going to give an unfair advantage to the majority. I'm going to show you examples of this in a moment so you can see what is actually meant. But you scatter people out so much that they barely lose every district or almost every district. You try to make it as close a race as possible with your party, the majority party, winning every election. The second way that you can gerrymander is by using what's called packing. So packing comes into play where you place district lines and you put as many of your opposition into a single district as possible. So in one district, they're going to crush it. they're going to win by an overwhelming majority. They're just going to completely blow out the competition, your opponent, your opposition party would. So that in every other district, your party wins. So you put all their people that vote that way in one place so that you win all the others. And that's going to give an unfair advantage to the minority party. So cracking and diluting gives an unfair advantage to the majority party. Packing gives an unfair advantage to the minority party. So we're going to take this down to really, really simple. Here we have a population of 15 people, 15 voters. We have the Plum Party and we have the Red Party. Those are our two political parties. And for our area, we've been allotted 3 districts. So we're electing 3 representatives. We know that we have a total population of 15. We know that we have 3 representatives to elect. So we can draw district lines in different ways that are either going to benefit the majority party or going to benefit the minority party, or they're going to accurately represent the will of the people. So, Plum Party, there's 9 people who typically vote along with the Plum Party. There are 6 people in our area who typically vote along with the Red Party. That means that the Plum Party has a 60% majority and the Red Party has a 40% minority. So, if we're going to draw new district lines to divide this up into 3 parts that would accurately represent the will of the people, we need to figure out how to draw those lines. We know, because there's 15 total population and we need 3 districts, we know that we need to have 5 people in each district because we have to have equal number of population in each district. So if I drew it like example A, and I drew the lines where those are, I've divided it into 3 equal parts. There's 5 people represented. Who wins? Well, the Plum Party wins barely, but wins 3-2 in every single district. That is called diluting. Plum has a 60% majority, but they have 100% of the voice in these 3 districts. So it completely wipes out the voice of 40% of the population of this area. That is unfair. That is not representative of the people. 3-2 in District 1, 3-2 in District 2, and 3-2 in District 3. Plum, Plum, Plum. Plum wins 100% of the representation. Red has 0 voice in their government. They have no representation. A second way that we could draw it is like B. So with B, we draw the lines, and in District 1, Plum wins 3-2. In District 2, Red wins 3-2. And in District 3, Plum wins 4-1. So Red wins the central district while Plum wins the outer district. This results in Plum having 60% majority. They have a 67% voice in government. Red, having 40% minority of the population, has a 33% voice in government. So 2-1, everybody has representation, and it largely aligns with the overall political layout of this area. A third way that you could draw district lines is like example C. So with Plum having a 60% majority and Red having a 40% minority of the whole area, if we drew the lines like we see on example C, then we pack 5 Plum people into one district, by the way we drew the lines. So they crush it in that one. They completely win 100% in that one district. But in the other two districts, orange wins 3-2 and 3-2. So this is called packing, because you pack one political party into one district so that they can completely blow out that one, and then you can win as a minority party the other districts. This is also unfair. Red has 67% of the voice, but they only have 40% of the population. Plum has 60% population, but they have only 33% of the voice. So this does not align with the overall political layout of this area. It is unjust and unfair. And this is what gerrymandering does. Notice that all three examples, no people move houses. No one relocates. The only thing that changes is where you draw the district lines. Nobody changes political party, and nobody moves. So just by changing where the district lines are drawn when redistricting comes about, people can control the outcome of elections in the overall layout. So let's take this to a larger scale. And I've already drawn the district lines on these as well. In this example, green has a slight majority. Green has a 56.2% of the population. The magenta political party has 43.8% of the population. So, if we had these outcomes, what one would be fair? With a 56% majority, you would expect, we're drawing 4 districts, okay, to lay this out, 4 districts. Each of the districts is going to have 16 voters in it. So they're all equally divided. The number of dots in each district is 16. That has to be equal for districting to even happen. So with green having a majority of 56% of the population, magenta having a minority of 43%, 44%-ish of the population, which ones are fair? Green having 3 representatives and magenta having 1, that's 75 to 25%. That could be fair because green does have a majority. 2-2, where green wins and magenta wins, equal representation. That also could be a fair outcome because they're close to 50% and close to 50%. That could be a fair outcome. But the bottom left, where green has 100% of the representation and magenta has 0 voice in the government, that is not fair. Magenta has almost 44% of the population in this area and has no voice or no representation. That is completely unfair. That would be an example of diluting. On the bottom right, magenta has a minority position, 44%, under 44% of the population, but ends up with 75% of the voice. Green has 56% plus of the population, but ends up with only 25% of the voice, less than half of the percentage of the total population. So that's also an unfair outcome, and that's called packing. We packed all the green into one and then drew the rest so that magenta had barely a win in every area. All right, so I want you to stop the video here, and I want you to go over to the links that I've provided, and I want you to watch the gerrymandering videos, number 4, number 5, and number 6 in the supporting videos. Should be a link to these supporting videos for Chapter 14 in this email and also on RenWeb. So I want you to watch videos number 4, number 5, and number 6 on gerrymandering. The first one is going to be Gerrymandering 101 about districting. The second one is going to be Gerrymandering 101 about how gerrymandering
of the animal kingdom is.
And the third one is about gerrymandering of the jungle. And so watch those 3 videos, then come right back here to where we left off and we'll start looking at gerrymandering again. All right, so I hope that you are back and you've watched those 3 videos to make gerrymandering a little bit more clear. Here's some examples of districts drawn that have been drawn unfairly and unjustly in real life. This one is in Maryland, and you can see how strange the shape is of this district. Here's another one that's in Florida. And this one was accused, when they protested it, of racial packing, putting people of one race in one district in order to pack them in and remove their voice. Here's one that's in Texas that spans between the southeast side of Austin and the southeast side of San Antonio. But this one is considered to be probably the worst example of gerrymandering in the United States, and it's up near Chicago. So here's the story behind how they drew this particular district. There are 2 Hispanic, There are 2 Hispanic neighborhoods in Chicago. One is Puerto Rican predominantly, and one is predominantly Mexican, and they're separate from each other. So what they did in this districting is they tried to lump those 2 separate neighborhoods together and join them by an area that has a vacant road over on the west side, and link them into a single district. And that's what they did. Ended up with 1 Hispanic congressperson in representation by design. So all sorts of things happen with redistricting and gerrymandering. Gerrymandering also can come into play, and it brings up a question of, why do we elect presidents in the United States the way we do? We don't have a national popular vote where everyone votes and it's one person, one vote, and so the clear majority in the U.S. wins. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. So we're going to walk through the Electoral College and how this functions. The Electoral College is a body of electors. They represent the state in a presidential and vice presidential election every 4 years. So each state with state sovereignty gets to determine how they utilize their electors. Do they put all of their electors' votes toward the person who won the majority in their state, or they divide it up by percentage? They get to choose as a state how they divide up and utilize their electoral votes. The number of electors total is 538. And the way that you get that is by having our 100 senators plus our 435 House of Representatives congressmen plus 3 more electors that come from the District of Columbia. District of Columbia does not have a senator. District of Columbia does not have a congressman in the House of Representatives. But it does get to vote on the presidential election. So 100 plus 435 plus 3 is 538. That means that it takes 270 electoral votes to win the presidential and vice presidential election. U.S. territories don't get to vote on president. Why would we do it this way instead of a national popular vote? I mean, it sounds like a national popular vote would probably be the better way to do it. That way 51% rules. But actually, our founding fathers were pretty wise in putting the Electoral College in place. Here's some of the things that the Electoral College does to protect the people of the United States. One thing is it protects against the tyranny of the bare majority. Should 51% of the country control 100% of the country? And our founding fathers were concerned both with the tyranny of a king, but also with the tyranny of the majority. Our country was very much founded on individual rights, our own individual rights, and our ability to stand on those rights and not have our entire life controlled because there's one extra person that's on a different side of an opinion than the rest of the country, and it tips the scale to over 50%. A second reason why we have the Electoral College is it gives state sovereignty, state rights. Each state gets to choose its own election rules, and each state gets to choose how its electors are distributed and utilized. So it gets into states' rights as opposed to the federal government only, because we are the United States of America. A third thing that it does is it places protections against corruption. Instead of having one massive popular vote where everything is the same, there are 51 independent popular elections, one in each state and one in the District of Columbia, that are held for president. So in order to corrupt the presidential election, you would have to control the outcomes of 51 different elections that have different rules and different processes that are based on each state's decision, instead of one same election across the whole country. And a fourth thing that it does is it requires support from different types of voters from different parts of the country. A presidential candidate can't just go to the major population centers on the two coasts and win those and then win the election. They have to garner support from urban and rural, from different states that have different opinions, different manufacturing and jobs and different backgrounds. So it gives a voice, the Electoral College gives a voice to both big and small states. So now I want to have you pause, and we're going to look at two more videos. There are two videos that will help explain more about the Electoral College. That's video number 7 and video number 8 from the supporting videos for Chapter 14, and you should be able to access those from the link that I sent you. Video number 7 and video number 8 cover the Electoral College. One is going to explain the Electoral College overall, and the other is going to explain the difference in the movement toward the national popular vote and why that's damaging to our country. So go ahead and pause this video once again, jump over and watch the other two videos on the Electoral College, and then come right back and we'll finish up this chapter. Okay, so you're back. This is the results of the Electoral College for the 2020 election. You can see red states, which are Republican outcomes, and blue states, which are Democratic outcomes. You can see by the number of states that there were more states that voted for Republican than for Democrat. But because of the population distribution, each state has a louder voice if it has more population and a quieter voice if it has less of a population. So in the 2020 election, you have to get 270 electoral votes to win. Biden ended up with 306 electoral votes, and Trump ended up with 232 electoral votes. And that's the way the Electoral College worked out in 2020. Here's some other data. So with populations, this is from just a few years ago, you can see these are the only states, the dark gray, these are the only states that have more people in them than the county of Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has over 10 million people in it. So there are only, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's only 9 of the 50 states that have more people in them than Los Angeles County, which means if we did not have the Electoral College, the voice of Los Angeles County alone would drown out 41 other states' voice. So that really lopsides things for one particular area. Here's a comparison of all the counties in the United States. The red and the orange are almost equal population. So the number of counties here, the red counties, have a total population that are equal to, almost equal to exactly, the total population of all the other orange counties. It only takes 144 of the most populous counties to offset and balance out almost 3,000 other counties. So that's another reason for the Electoral College. Here is the way, let's see, I will just skip over this. Yeah. Here's another swollen map that shows by population the size of the voice compared to what would happen with the Electoral College. So if we did not have the Electoral College, the only 4 states that would really matter to win would be California, Texas, Florida, and or New York. And winning those 3 out of those 4 would pretty much flush out every other state's voice. So that covers the rest of boundaries. You will need to know, make sure you check your review sheets. You will need to know about how to draw some lines for districting on how to cheat in gerrymandering. And so make sure that you finish up your reviews and all that. Make sure also that you study those countries and the country maps. You can use Google Maps, or you can use any online atlas to find the African countries that match up with the word bank. And I will hope to see you on Friday. We'll go over some African countries then. And if not, then I'll see you on Monday for the tests. Blessings, and try to stay warm. Bye.